This episode is brought to you in part by my loyal patrons. If you've ever wanted to support what this podcast and what my music does, then you should go check it out. You can go to barenakedbravery.com/Patreon. That's Patreon. And you can see what it's like to become a patron of the podcast. You're listening to Bare Naked Bravery, a weekly podcast hosted by me, Emily Ann Peterson. This is the place where we expose the threads of heroism that stitch together the stories we admire most. As a musician, singer-songwriter, author, teaching artist, and business owner, I encounter some really fascinating stories. Every episode you'll hear features a revealing conversation with someone who courageously pours themselves out into the world. We'll talk about fears befriended, the terrors battled, and the courage created along our stories of bravery, quiet heroism, and all-out gutsiness. We open the Pandora's box of the dream-crushing constraints we all face during significant moments of bravery. These moments of bare naked bravery are rarely censored in real life, so if you're listening with little ears nearby, please know that some episodes may contain mature language and subject matter. The questions I ask today aren't scripted because I'm just curious. What is bravery? My hope for us all is that by listening to others search for and find their bravery, we will find our own. For that is what we need most, to know that we are not alone. The best way you can support the show is to share it with a friend or two. Send them an email, text, or tweet. Tag them in one of my Instagram posts. My handle's Emily Ann Pete. Or leave us a review on iTunes. It takes seconds and can be done from your phone right now. Bottom line, we need more bravery in the world. So let's be brave together. I am so excited for this episode because you get to meet Alison Sigmon today. She wrote the book Delivering Bad News in Good Ways, and she and I have had the chance to work together on a couple other fun book-related projects, and I'm really excited that she's here today. I know you will love her as much as I do. She is no stranger to effort and all the sheer grit required to build a business, and she knows what it's like to work with limited financial resources, limited time, and in constantly shifting markets where everyone on the team has to be a jack of all trades to problem solve fast and achieve results even faster, which it sounds a lot like the music industry. She has held executive level positions at a relationship support gamification website that she co-launched and promoted at South by Southwest in 2011. Most recently, though, she was the chief digital officer at an outdoor shopping television show, which is pretty cool. In addition to all of that, she's a project manager who has trained and facilitated and consulted with tens of thousands of people for over 16 years in Fortune 500 companies and government organizations around the world. And everything she's doing these days is focusing on the behavioral and communication side of project management and relationships. All of that is brave. But not only that, she is a clinical therapist and a Gulf War veteran, so she really knows what she's talking about, especially when it comes to bravery. Her first book, as I mentioned before, Delivering Bad News in Good Ways, was the first in a series on the subject, and we get to talk with her today while she's in the midst of writing the follow-up book, specifically geared to helping health professionals deliver bad news in good ways. Here we go. I am so glad that you got to join us today. Thank you for coming and onto the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Oh gosh, you're just one of my favorites. I just love it.
And likewise, of course.
Well, thank you. But this is going to be such a treat today. So I would love to talk with you a little bit about what it means to be brave when you're delivering bad news.
Okay.
So we can jump right into that. And specifically, I want to know, when was the last time you had to deliver bad news and be brave that you want to talk about?
Yeah. So, well, do you want a personal or do you want a professional? Because I've got all kinds of stories.
Can we do both?
We can.
Okay, let's do both. Do the personal one first.
Okay. So this is not really the last time, but it was certainly a really, really super impactful one. And I don't think you're aware of this. I can't remember, but unfortunately, my mother, she had cancer. And it was tricky because it was quite sad.
How old were you and her when she got it?
She was 59.
Oh, goodness. Okay.
Yeah. So it was
like age makes it worse. It's still awful regardless of what age you're in.
Yeah. And so what had happened was my brother Joe and we have different dads, same mom. And I love my stepfather. He was a great man, very intelligent. I grew up with him. Unfortunately, he had passed away 3 years prior to her diagnosis. And I think he was only like 59, 60 years old, something like that. So anyway, my brother was, as you can imagine, devastated. And I was too. But then my mother ended up being diagnosed with cancer, and it was a long, 3-year journey, basically. And the thing is that my mom was and this story is going to end up in the next book, by the way,
cool.
Delivering Bad News in Good Ways for Health Conditions. But this is the story. So she was telling me that she was healed. She was cancer-free. She was good to go. So she was rocking it out and feeling good. And this is after chemo and radiation and all this kind of stuff. And she had been in the hospital in April of the year that she died. And she was in the hospital for a week. But she came back and said everything was fine. So I, assumed everything was okay. But then in September, I get a voicemail from her doctor, which was kind of weird, asking me to give him a call. And so I did. And I called back. And you know how doctors are super busy and they never call you back straight away. Well, I left a message and bam, he called me back immediately. And I knew there was a problem. And so he said, Alison, your mother is very, very sick. And I said, what do you mean very, very sick? And she said she's cancer-free. He said, can we meet? Well, I lived in North Carolina and he was down in Georgia. And so I called my dad, my biological dad. I said, Dad, I'm going to tie this to a trip. I'm flying in. Can you pick me up? And basically the doctor said that she didn't have long to live, probably. And so I said, but I don't understand. Why now? I mean, he said, she's been sick for a long time. She finally said that she wanted one of her children to get involved in her treatment, and she asked me to contact you.
Wow.
He also said, if I remember correctly, he also said, and she doesn't want your brother to know right now.
Ugh.
Yeah. Okay. So now you know where I'm going.
It's like,
right?
That's warrants an eye roll. And also, I get it, but...
So, here I am, dealing with the shock of my mother basically being in deep, deep, deep denial about her condition, selecting me to be the one to manage her care and asking me not to tell my brother. So not working, right? So anyway, I thought about it and I said, I have to tell him I can't. But how do you tell a sibling who just lost a parent 3 years prior that he's about to lose another parent? I mean, how do you do that, right? And so I thought, well, and this wasn't the cowardly way to do it. I hope nobody thinks of this, but when I looked at who the best person was positioned, and that's part of the model that, separate, evaluate, deliver. One of the steps in delivery is to step back and go, okay, be rational here. Are you really the right person to deliver this bad news, or is there somebody else who'd be better suited for it? And I realized my brother's wife was much better suited. We would talk about it, but she was really the one that needed to have this conversation. And so I called her.
I really like that. I mean, whenever I've had to deliver bad news, like I think when the immediacy of how terrible the news is often eliminates that option for who can deliver this news. And so if you're the one gifted with this role of, well, you got to communicate this bad news, like how refreshing it is to know, like, oh, wow, somebody else could deliver this for me, not out of a lazy way, but out of that this news will be best received if it's coming out of someone else's mouth.
Right. Pick your messenger. I mean, that's really what it comes down to.
Basically stepping out of the way of the message.
So understanding that and realizing that there might be a better person to do this, I called her. We talked it through, and I asked her advice. I said, understanding what the impact, because the piece I didn't share with you was that they were business partners. My mother and my brother were business partners, and they had a cranking business. They were growing, and it was great. And I mean, so this was really, really hard. I mean, they were neighbors. They lived next door to each other. I mean, it was just really convoluted and complicated. So she ended up telling him, and he called me immediately. So I used to live in Turkey, and living in Turkey years ago, I learned the value. Yes, that's right. I remember.
You lived there longer than I did, but
okay. So that's right, because I was there for 15 months. And so I learned, and you know this from your own experience, but there's an aspect of the culture, particularly in that region, of saving face. It was just one of those things that I had to understand in order to work and live with the wonderful people that I worked and lived with. And so I wanted to give my brother a chance to handle his emotional self so that he could then deal with the rational, oh my God, what are we going to do now? So that's what I chose to do. Now, certainly I have given bad news directly. I've been in the unfortunate position of telling people that, hey, our startup is out of money and we've got nothing else. Nothing else is coming in. I've been in the position of having to let somebody go, which is never fun. So I've done it directly if it's appropriate. And in this case, it was better handled this way. So that's what the personal story is.
How did he handled it. I'm assuming he had no choice to handle it, of course, but how did he handle it?
Right. Well, so we decided that we were going to tell my mom straight away that he knew. We decided that she needed to feel in control of the situation because she'd already had to relinquish quite a bit of control with this, asking me to be the executor, basically. And
then there's the whole issue of having cancer, too. So.
Well, I mean, that's just a whole other animal, right?
Right.
So my father, my brother, and the doctor and I met. And we got the lowdown. And as a matter of fact, the doctor said, frankly, when she was in the hospital back in April, I did not expect her to survive. I was stunned. And he was an incredible, I get goosebumps thinking about this guy. He was incredible. He said, I wasn't in the military, but I was a doctor in the military. And he said, I haven't seen this depth of denial among patients. And he said, I've been in practice for 30 years. I have not seen the depth of denial since I was in Vietnam. Because in Vietnam, they didn't have medicine, 30 years ago that they have now, right? And so they used denial, deep denial, to do pain management. And that's what my mom did. And she tacked on an additional almost year to her life just with managing through denial. And that's what's so interesting. That's part of an aspect of the book itself is we look at what are some of the reasons why we hold back on giving bad news? What are some of the ways that we actually do this? And so in the book, I've noted lots of defense mechanisms and given examples, and one of which is denial. And, it's funny. Denial for me is tenacity pushed too far. You know what? How's that?
Yeah. I'm writing that down.
See it?
Tenacity pushed too far.
And I'll back up and say that, we all have these wonderful strengths, and we're drawn to people because of these strengths, right? And we get a lot of like instant gratification from playing out our strengths. We feel kind of awesome, right? But a weakness is a strength pushed too far. It's when we do something, we overuse that strength, that it's the tipping point between being an asset to becoming a liability. And it's really important for people to, I think, understand that. What is that tipping point? And the example I like to give with that is we have a couple, they get together, and let's say one of them is, very low key and kind of introverted. The other's like, whoa, kind of excited and ready to go. And they're very talkative, and they talk about being in love with each other. And so the one who's not very talkative is like, oh, and I'll just use gender pronouns. She's so chatty, and she's always happy. She's got so many things to say, and she's so fabulous, and I love it. And I love listening to her. And then, of course, she's like, oh, he's so quiet. He's attentive. He pays attention. Then you fast forward the relationship 15 years, she won't shut up. She talks all the time. She's making me nuts. Whereas he won't say anything. He's like a doorknob. I don't think I can get anything from it. You know what I mean? So what has happened is that strength is a weakness pushed too far. So in the case of this denial, I see tenacity as being just, and my mother was that, a Doberman. Just you're on it, you push and you rebound. As a matter of fact, I haven't told anybody this. I'm just waiting for people to figure it out. One of the stories in my book is about my mother. Yes. And it's a wonderful example of her tenacity. But again, her tenacity played out. It hit the tipping point and became denial. And when I tell you that, you're going to go back, you look at the story and go, oh, I know what it is.
Yes. So the other day I was talking with a friend who, when I had like a down and out moment where I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life. My career is like hit like this roadblock. And her response to me was not, here, let me help you with this tangible solution. Let me help you problem solve. Her response was, you are so scrappy. I know you'll figure it out. And I hated it, but I knew I needed that advice. Like I knew I needed someone to say, you've got the tenacity to pull this through. You're pretty resilient, so you're going to be fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know that tenacity has sometimes been I don't want to use the word negative, but has held me back in some respects. Because I'm like so Doberman-ish that I've failed to recognize some of the other factors involved in a situation. So,
yeah, absolutely.
How did that denial play out through the remainder of her life and relationship with you guys?
Well, so she ended up, so that was September. And by the beginning of December, I got a call that, well, she was going back into the hospital. And so I ended up visiting her in the hospital because basically her body it had metastasized. It had metastasized much earlier, but she didn't say anything.
Right.
And so it just started spreading through her body. So here's, the next bad news related to the same story is we were in Asheville actually visiting some people, and I got the call that it was time for her to go into hospice, and they wanted me to basically handle it. And so she cried. She didn't want to go. She was not a fight. I mean, she was a bulldog, like fighter, like, I'm too young to die. And, she was pissed off, actually, quite frankly. She was pissed off. She had a lot more to do. At this point, she's only 62 years old. And by today's standards, that's like nothing. It's like 40. And so she was really, really mad. And then she's like, well, if I have to die, I want to die at home. And then there was silence for me. And I said, Mom, and here's my bad news that I had to give to her. I said, I can't do it. I can't do it by myself. And I know myself. And so in the context of that relationship, I had to kind of hold a mirror up and go, okay, Alison, what are you capable of? And one of the things I was not capable of, and I had to admit it, even though it is not like me to not take on any challenge, throw down the gauntlet, by God, I'm on it, right?
Well, you are your mother's daughter.
I am my mother's daughter, but I realized I topped out on this one, and I couldn't administer the morphine that I knew that she was going to require. I could clean her, but oddly enough, I couldn't clean her teeth. I mean, there were just these little things that I knew about myself, and I couldn't do it. And so I said, Mom, I hear you, but I am not capable of doing this. So you're going to have to meet me in the middle. And so in the middle, what I offered is I said, if you go, I will live with you in hospice for as long as it takes.
Whoa.
And there was silence on the phone. And she said, okay. And so we packed up our stuff in Asheville. We drove back to Raleigh. I packed up my car because I didn't know how long it was going to take. In the meantime, they transported her to hospice, and I moved into a room with her, and I gave myself 1 hour off a day. 1 hour off a day. And so again, it was interesting to think about the separate, evaluate, deliver, and then the actual conversation. You kind of come in these cases, you kind of come face to face with yourself, and you're a fool if you don't own what you can and can't do. And what's the best you can hope for and the least you could live with? I had all this kind of existential guilt around my mom and her last wishes. And, the woman didn't even have a will. I had to talk her into writing a will because she was so adamant that she was not going to die. So adamant.
Wow. So. Now, I mean, I have had distant relationship with hospice care. However, I don't know of many people who have chosen to move in to hospice.
It was great. Fortunately they had the extra bed.
I mean, is that a typical thing?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not typical for people to move into hospice. Am I mistaken?
No, that's right. And it was, it was a really wonderful experience. I had a chance to meet some of the other patients, some of the other families. I had a chance to really hang out with the staff who were amazing. I mean, just absolutely amazing. I did a lot of reading. My hour away, I'd get in the car and I'd go on a shopping trip or something, and I brought back food. And it was, and at one point it was funny because this young doctor got so used to seeing me. It was, if I wasn't there, he's like, okay, where's your sister? Where's Alice? It was just funny, and it was a great experience. But in the meantime, I don't think I slept for the weeks that I lived there.
How long were you there for?
Almost 3 weeks.
Wow.
Almost 3 weeks. And I had to listen to my mother, just fight. She was so angry. At one point, if I remember correctly, it was the middle of the night, and she is thrashing in her bed, and she's angry with all the people that she's talking to. Now, morphine's tricky stuff, right? So you're buzzing, you're pretty high. But she was also in a dream state. And so she had conversations with her dead brother, with her dead mother, with her dead husband. I mean, she was pissed off and she didn't want this.
And she was angry with all of those people? Or what were those dreams like?
It was as if they were trying to say, you know what? This is a threshold. It's time to go. And she's like, I'm not going. I'm not doing it. I'm not, no, I'm not ready.
Wow.
All this other stuff I want to do.
I have so many goosebumps right now.
So it really stretched my personal, I got to see things about me. I've done other things in my life that have certainly tested. I mean, I was in the military, I was in war. I mean, I was just a lot of different things that
I mean, you are no stranger to being outside of the comfort zone.
Right. And this one was probably it, and but the thing with my brother was that he and his wife, they started their relationship before they even got married with shuttling my mother back and forth to chemotherapy and all that kind of stuff. And all I could do was offer to pay her bills. I mean, so I was working my ass off, and we basically took care of her for months on end, and it caused problems within our own family, and then my mother delivered bad news to my sister-in-law, who was griping about what the daughter was not doing, during all that. And she's like, do you have $5,000 or $10,000 burn a hole in your pocket each month? And she's like, well, no. Well, then you need to shut up, because my daughter needs to work because she's helping to pay for me. Okay. So it was just a really interesting situation. So the reason why I tell you that story, though, is because my brother had made the decision that if she went into hospice, he would not see her again. He couldn't do it. It was so gut-wrenching. They had lived this entire illness with her, and they walked on water in my eyes. I mean, they were amazing people for what they did, especially at such a young age. They're only in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's right. They're late 20s, early 30s.
Would you consider your brothers, because in my opinion, I think that's a perfectly okay choice to make.
Mm-hmm. Did not judge it.
Do you consider that choice to be brave?
I think it was very brave, but I'm going to tell you what was even braver. Is he would come and sit in the lobby of hospice, but he refused to come back. But seeing me there day in and day out, and just persevering and still laughing and still, just being present, it gave him the courage to go back there. And he did.
He eventually saw her?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was one of those things, and it was totally his choice. Because I told him, it's like, I'm like, dude, you guys carried this thing. I mean, you totally ruled, doing this thing. And I couldn't be there. I live 3 states away, and I travel all the time. And I can't tell you how much to look, man, nobody faults you for making this decision. But then he came around and he decided to, and it was really great.
I would say it's even a brave thing to just set foot on the property when when it's so close to the decision that you had already chosen otherwise.
Yeah. Oh, it was huge. It was absolutely huge. So, I hats off to him over and over again. I mean, the things that he did for her and his wife did. I mean, it was just watching them go through this was incredible. And so, he would break down. He was upset. And I said, look, Joe, I said, I'm not an ice princess here. Okay. This is not about me. This is about our mother and what our mother needs. And what our mother needs right now is for me to be as together as I can possibly make it. Because this, again, is not about me. And so my focus was on her and making sure that her last days were as present as possible without having to deal with any emotion that I was feeling. Because to me, that would have been like the most selfish thing I could have ever done. What I could do is make sure that she was attended to and to give her permission to die, to just make it okay. And so the only thing I really wanted was I actually wanted to be there when it happened, because that little, what's the weight? I forget, of the soul. There's supposed to be a weight of a soul, actually.
Oh, I don't know.
They made a movie, and that's what they called it, and I can't think of the name of it at the moment. But it's 3 ounces or something. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, I had gotten a little puppy. We had arranged this long before the whole hospice thing happened. And so it was a cross between, and she's here. Daisy's here now. But a cross between, the mom was a Corgi and the dad was a Jack Russell Terrier. And so she's a skinny Corgi, super cute. And so obviously couldn't have her shipped to my house in Raleigh. So I had her shipped to Atlanta. And so I took my 1 hour and I drove down to Atlanta Airport and I picked her up. And I had her there living with me in hospice with my mother for a few days.
Oh, wow.
But of course, dogs have to go to the bathroom. So for 5 minutes, I kid you not, for 5 minutes, I went out to take my dog to go to the bathroom. And when I came back, my mother was dead.
Wow.
And that was it. And so what I had told
What was that day like?
Well, what I had told everybody leading up to this point, because nobody could believe, you're like, you're so together, you're so this, I'm like, because it's not about me. But I guarantee you, when she's gone, I'm falling apart. My ass is like on the floor. And literally, it was. I just knelt down on the floor. I was on my knees like a yoga, like child pose. And I just laid down. I had my dog with me, and I just wailed. I fell apart, as I knew I would. And it was okay. There was no shame in that. And then when the mortuary people came to get her body, I said, you'll do one thing. You will not cover her face. She needs to go into the back of that ambulance with her face as if she's a patient. Do not cover her face. And so that's what they did. So I walked her down, put her in the back, and said goodbye. So that was that personal story.
I actually think that that's a beautiful way to honor that tenacity and that denial.
Yeah, fight her to the very end.
You almost let that denial continue beyond her death, and I think that is such a gift to her.
Do you really?
I do. I thought
that way. So yeah,
I do, because I think like you were saying earlier, your weaknesses are strengths that are just stretched a little too thin. And one of her strengths is her tenacity. And a symptom of that was denial, of course, but you exhibit that all the time in your life, just because I know you. That tenacity comes through in the books that you're writing, and also in the conversations you have with your patients and with your clients and all of that. And so I think was just a gorgeous way to send your mom off. Really.
Well, thank you. It was funny. During her funeral, I had this moment where, again, I'd been so together and I fell apart, and my best friend was like, you've been so together. I'm like, yeah, but it's my turn now. I get this. If I need to do this, I'm going to have this time, and I don't care what anybody says. This is now my turn. And every day, it was hard, but there were times we used to talk like daily for just a short period of time. And it was always after I dropped my kids off at school. And so there were a few times, this is so stupid, where I hold my phone in my ear and I pretend like I was talking to my mom. It took me a few years to actually delete her from my address book.
Yeah.
And I think I actually never deleted her. It just happened because I changed phones and not everything transferred. But I would just hold the phone in my ear and I would just talk, And I've treated people when I was in private practice. I mean, I've treated people with these kind of just bereavement issues. And I think what people don't always understand is that you got to give yourself time. I mean, back to my current book, Delivering Bad News in Good Ways, that's part of that evaluation step where you're stepping back and you're going, okay, what are the possible options in terms of how people are going to respond? And you try and anticipate that. And listen, we're not going to anticipate all of them, but what it does is it makes you human when you start thinking about, okay, they might come up with these 4 things that they're considering. And so as you're planning for the delivery of that bad news, you've had time with that bad news, but they're just hearing it for the first time once you have that conversation, right? So you've got to give them time. And that's a really important thing to understand is giving people time. I think our impulse, like my mother, my impulse would have been to I wasn't more disciplined about the whole thing, or let me just say focused on her, is to like take care of my own, do anything. And I've seen this with patients before who family members are like, well, I'll just make it personal. My stepfather was like that about his mother. I mean, the woman was near 90 years old, and he was still fretting, when she ended up passing away. And in his book, the doctors hadn't done enough. The nurses hadn't done enough. The medical staff, nobody. And really, at the end of the day, he just couldn't let her go. So, everybody.
The busy work or the anxiety fuels busy work.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And so just giving time, to take it back, to give people time to get used to what you already know, and don't let your own anxiousness around their response I think it can be catchy. You can catch it, right? And make it your own when it's not yours.
Yeah. I mean, like, you can catch the grief, or explain that a little more.
Let's use a business example. Let's say that you'd asked me about a business example. One of the examples that we have is that it was on a startup, it was an outdoor shopping television show. We had spent a lot of money on television because television is the 800-pound gorilla, is hugely expensive. But towards the end, we were in the process of making episodes available online, just making some changes so that we could manage the money a little better, but letting people know that we were out of money. We, the leadership team, already knew we were out of money. And we had been racking our brains for months for how we were going to do it, but telling our people for the first time, there's anxiety, right? They're thinking about their own security and their safety and their, all these kinds of things, and they're mad and whatever. And it's very easy to catch their feelings. In other words, assume how they're feeling. And then the whole thing comes undone, right? But instead, just like with my mother, focus on the other. This is not about you. It's almost like when I was doing therapy, there was a technique called guided imagery, and there's also an object relations type thing. But that's not really what I mean. Turning something, a problem, making it an object, as opposed to something that you have or I have. It's just really something that it's this cup that sits between us, right? And it exists outside of us. And so I think when you are giving bad news, you are externalizing, not in an insensitive sort of way. You're just making it this object that's in between us that has got to be dealt with. And that way you give them time to have their emotions, and you don't catch their emotions and assume them as your own.
Yeah, that provides almost a boundary between the projection of your own emotions or their emotions.
Right.
I've gotten a couple questions from you guys about whether the music that you're hearing in the episodes is mine or someone else's. The music is someone else's. It's a collection of musicians and artists that are represented by Music Box Licensing. And Music Box Licensing is a wonderful organization and company who I have friends who work with them. And I just really wanted to give all of those artists a shout out and give them some credit. So if you'd like to know who some of these artists are, I would go check out Music Box Licensing and listen to who is represented by them. I did this for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to showcase other people's artwork and music, and I think Music Box Licensing is a phenomenal organization that does that and supports the artists in the process without squashing them, which brings me to our sponsor for today, which is patreon.com. Patreon is a website that I use for my patrons to subscribe to support me every month. I have patrons who support me for as little as $1 a month, and some more than that. They get a sneak peek into some of the songs that I've got going right now and what the recording process is like, and some of my touring process, and some of just my emotional behind the scenes process behind all of this, the podcast, the songwriting, the performing, the touring, everything. If you are curious about any of that, then I would suggest that you go check out patreon.com/Emily Ann Peterson, or you can just go to barenakedbravery.com/Patreon, which is spelled Patreon. You can sign up to become a supporter of the show and of my music. And if you do that, then you get access to a whole bunch of privately accessed stuff. I want to just thank you ahead of time. And anyways, regardless of what happens and regardless of how you support the show, your support, be it word of mouth or sharing the news or just a hurrah in your car alone, all of that is really felt by me. And it's really important that you care for your fellow artists and the people around you in whatever way you can. So I want to thank you for that, and also just say that I am just so grateful for all of the support that you're already giving. Thank you. Before we started talking, you asked me a little bit about some of the recurring topics that I've noticed happening in some of these early episodes. And one of them is boundaries.
Okay. And how so?
Well, I'm a big fan of them in general.
Imagine that.
So I don't know how much of that recurring theme is just me nerding out on them. But I also think that brave moments require less improvisation than we anticipate, or like when you're in a moment that somebody deems brave and you're being the brave person. I've noticed that a lot of those moments are very controlled, or you make a very intentional effort to move forward in a decision. And that intentionality has a lot of boundaries in place, typically.
Well, what's tricky about that, though, is you can come across as being insensitive, and that's not the objective here.
Oh, of course.
You're totally human, and you have empathy for the other person. But some people, it doesn't come off that way.
Exactly, which I think is part of the factor of making it seem brave, is that you're doing something that not everyone would do.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that for a second in terms of bravery. It's very interesting. So we spend a lifetime basically building a worldview. This is the world according to Emily Ann. This is the world according to Alison, right? This is it. But then we start moving through life, and some of the assumptions that we've made in terms of that worldview start getting invalidated, right? We say things like, oh, I couldn't do that. There's just no way I could do that. Well, okay, help me understand why. Well, because I've never done it before, or it's so different, or it's, but is it interesting? Well, a little. Okay, so what would life look like if you could do it? And then just kind of start working with that. But I think we kind of work our way in the box.
That's the situation with the boundaries and bravery, is that you are aware of where that boundary of comfort is, especially when you're feeling vulnerable, right? Like when you're feeling vulnerable with somebody, or you're about ready to take a leap out of an airplane and do something quote unquote brave, which I actually think that would be brave. I haven't done that yet. So,
awesome.
But I think one of the natures of being the brave person is knowing that you're outside of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
And you're beyond the boundary of comfort.
How do you push the envelope on that? What kind of mental dialogue do you have to move you to A, recognize it, number one, and then two, decide it's worth it to make the leap?
That's a great question. I think that's where a lot of that analytical viewpoint comes into play. You've gone about your life with this one framework of your worldview, and making a choice to do something brave requires you to put on a different pair of glasses and see the world in a different way, or look at the problem or the obstacle or the situation from a new angle. And I think those of us that get my book talks about this a little bit, which is that when you practice the act of looking at things from new angles, when you are in the moment of a difficult situation, you then have more skill set to make the right decision because you've practiced how to do that in previous. Do you know what I mean?
Well, therein lies the thing that's really important is that practice. But also equally important is to know your limitations. There's bravery in knowing what your limitations are.
Well, just like I think in your story, there is an extreme amount of bravery delivering bad news to your mother and having her say, I'm not going to go to hospice. And you saying, okay, well, that's something that has to happen. Like you can't come live with me because that's not going to happen. Knowing those limitations and expressing those is brave in and of itself.
Well, but the other thing was, I don't know how brave this was, but the other thing in this case was turning the question around and saying, if I can't do it, then what are you going to do?
Right.
And then helping her own and take some ownership of the decision. It wasn't just her daughter telling her she has to do this. Instead, I'm telling you what I can and can't do. What are your options?
Yeah. I mean, which brings up another recurring theme that I've noticed is the concept of victim.
Yeah.
You know, like by asking your mom to own up to her side of the situation, you were also requiring that she didn't treat herself as a victim and as you as the oppressor.
Right. So I'm not, and there's no good guy or bad guy here. There's nobody to beat up or to blame. It's interesting in our culture, and I can't speak to necessarily other cultures, but here in the United States, we have a tendency to do a lot of hero worshiping. So we have the good guy and the bad guy, and we've got this archetype of the hero, and we're expected to really be more than what we actually are. But at the end of the day, we're just human, and that's the thing that makes us all. It unites us. It's not just death and the experience of death that unites us. It's the fact that we are all human, and with human needs and emotions, and to not speak to what you are afraid of is unfortunate, because you are missing an opportunity for a connection that you wouldn't maybe otherwise have. So part of what we're doing with the SED method, to bring it back to that, is separate.
And again, SED is SED and stands for separate,
evaluate, and deliver. And so, yes, it sounds hokey, but you got to get it said. So it's just an easy way to remember it. But what we're doing in that first step is we are separating. We're looking at the facts. What do we know? How do we parse it, fact from opinion? So that we can actually get to the point where we could have that conversation. And part of that is looking at ourselves. It's objective questions. What do we smell, think, hear? What do we know? It's also understanding how we're not always accountable to those things.
Yeah.
By acknowledging them, I think what that does is it gives us a better opportunity to act on it. If you try to suppress it and act like, oh, that's really not a problem, then you know what? It's going to rear up later on. It's going to bite you in the butt. There's no doubt about it. And then moving into the evaluate, that's when we're, okay, well, how do I really feel about this? How does the other person feel? So that's kind of, you can see it over and over again, whether you're applying it in business or you're applying it in your personal life.
So once you've gone through the separate and you've acknowledged your limitations and the facts of the situation, and then you've evaluated those limitations and the facts and what the person receiving the bad news can handle, what are some encouragements or pieces of advice that you give to someone for the delivery aspect? I mean, you've already mentioned one, which is that you don't have to be the deliverer of the bad news. Someone else can do it.
Right. Right. Whether we're giving a presentation to a big auditorium or we're meeting one-on-one with somebody or in some kind of small group,
Right.
I think a lot of times we're so focused on the content of that discussion that we forget about the actual delivery. And so part of this is understanding a little bit about the receiver or anticipating it. Now, I'm making the assumption. Now, let me back up. I know you know this better than anybody. We're all great fiction writers at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In the absence of information, we make it up. And so we'll spin a yarn pretty fast because our brains want structure. It makes us feel better. We can manage that anxiety much better. And so a little bit of structure that you can add to that from a delivery standpoint is trying to anticipate your receiver's style. What do you know about them? Are they doers? Do they want to get in there and brainstorm? Are they thinkers? You got to send it off to them and let them have a think on it and then come back the next day. Are they critics? Are they going to just like slash and burn every single thing you say? I mean, I can think about this with my stepdad. There, when we would do debate, that was our big connection, is debating with each other. And as when I was younger, I didn't understand what he was trying to do, but he was actually modeling for me, how do you have a good, healthy argument, like a debate, and where people don't fall apart emotionally, because it's not about you or me. Again, it's about this thing that we're talking about. And so I grew to understand that and laugh, actually, at times when he would play the critic and he would slash and burn. And it was almost like, if you ever watched TV Land, I Dream of Jeannie. I don't know if you've ever heard that TV show.
Yes,
but
yes.
in TV Land, sometimes she'll like blink and she'll become really tiny and she'll sit like up in the corner of the major's office and like watch everything that's going on. That's how I felt, like I had like pulled myself out of my body and I'm just kind of watching us go back and forth. And he's pissed off, clear. He's like all this, he's not really pissed. He's just like being really passionate about what he was doing. He's slashing and burning. And it's like, he's got to go through this. This is his MO. This is what he does. And once he gets on the other side of this thing, slashing and burning, and I don't take it personally, then we'll get down to the business of dealing with things. And so some of it is just is knowing the other or anticipating the other. And you know what? You might get it wrong, and that's okay. Just keep watching and keep asking questions. Questions are your friend in this case. Now, don't do it ad nauseum, because at some point people are thinking you're just playing them and they're not going to appreciate that. But questions just keep chipping away at what the core issue is. Again, another thing in American culture is we're fix-it, right? We see a problem and our big flag moment is, woohoo, I fixed it, right? You've got a problem, I'm on this, I got you. But that might not be what's needed here. And so to jump in and fix it is more about you than it is the other person. So give the person some space. Try and anticipate. So you asked me a question, try and anticipate what their style is. Are they critics? Are they skeptics? Are they really charismatic and they want to have a chat? Are they thinkers? I'm a thinker. You got bad news for me? Okay, give it to me. Maybe text me or email me. Let me have a think on it. And then we'll circle back. I just need to process. That's what analysts do, right? But other people are not like that. So you try and anticipate the style, and then you just give time and you ask questions, not in a hounding sort of way, but just seek to understand, if that helps. And in the book, I did, it's a little bit of a spin on another model that I teach when I'm teaching workshops, but it's called the talk model. And it's a 3-step process that just, all right, you've prepared for this conversation. Now we're in it. How do I manage the conversation, right? So be prepared to be surprised. And if you're stumbling, if you're not sure, then ask a question. Just keep being curious and trying to understand. And now, I say that there are some people out there that no matter what you do, they're not going to be rational. That's when you step away.
You go back to the separate part of Sid.
You separate, like literally. Because you got a deal breaker here. I think that's the other piece in conversations. I don't think we always understand what our deal breakers are. So there's an aspect of the model where we look at what is the best you can hope for and the least you can live with. And what that does is it sets up a set of goalposts. That's a good way to think of it. Boundaries, to use your word. It sets up your boundaries in terms of this conversation. I'm delivering some news. They're probably not going to be happy about it. What's the best you can hope for, at least you can live with, in terms of what you've got to do as a result of the news? And then you just hang in there, because if you in the conversation before you've gotten what you need, then you're going to come back and have to have the conversation again. Now, you might need to, because, well, if you're breaking up a relationship, it's probably going to take some time, right? If you're ending a relationship, which, by the way, I'm going to share with you just as an aside, I don't actually think relationships ever end. I think they just change status.
Oh, yeah.
You'll always have that relationship.
Oh, I'm all about that. I'm all
just
about
like
that.
You and your cello and your hand and you always have that relationship. It just changes a little bit. But if you're ending a relationship, changing the status of a relationship, it might take a little bit more time. But what's the best you can hope for, at least you can live with? And that helps you, again, with your own emotional management, I think, is just asking yourself some of these questions, like going into the conversation.
I read, this sounds kind of like a hokey book, but it's actually a pretty decent book. And speaking of relationship, I dated a guy who thought that it was ridiculous that I even had it on my bookshelf. The book's called The Good Girl's Guide to Negotiations.
Oh,
and that was one of the biggest pieces of advice when you're doing negotiations. And the word negotiation, especially in regards to delivering bad news and relationships, that makes it sound like really cold and ice queeny. But like you said, what's the least I can hope for?
What's the best you can hope for, at least you can live with, all right?
Yes.
The best you can hope for, at least you can live with. Mm-hmm.
Best you can hope for, at least you can live with. That's what you have to do before you go into a negotiation with anyone, be it like your landlord or a relationship or a business environment. Knowing those parameters is what you have to do before you walk into any negotiation. And to some degree, delivering bad news has an air of that.
Well, it will certainly. I mean, it's a conversation about, what your current state is and what the future state is. And the future state is going to change based on what you believe is the right thing to do. One of the things that people also suffer from that I've seen is just impulse control. And some of it has to do with separation to evaluation piece. I'll give you an example. How long do you think it takes to form an impression of a person?
Well, I feel like I've been doing online dating too long to give you a...
No, just to put a number out there.
Well, I would hope that it's 5 minutes, but I'm guessing it's probably closer to 30 seconds.
It's even less.
No. Ugh,
yes.
I'm screwed.
Dude, I'm telling you, it is like that. So I think it's called phonemes, Phonemes. Anyway, that's a sound in language, and all languages have them, right? And so we learn them at birth, and you have little dendrites, and they da-da-da-da. Well, anyway, in the time that it takes to say CHA, cha, that takes 250 milliseconds. For you to form an impression of someone takes 100 to 150 milliseconds. Yes, I know, right? It takes you less time than it takes to say the sound.
That's so not fair.
I know, right? No. See, so what happens is we just come loaded. When we have a conversation with somebody, we think you and I are having a conversation, but actually we have a whole party in the room with us. We're bringing every experience, everybody we got, into that conversation. We're all here. It's a big old party happening up in here, and that's all there's to it. And so what happens is we learn all these dynamics and these models that we've picked up along the way, remember, as part of our worldview. And so what some people experience is they can't manage their impulse. Once there's a little bit of emotion, either they are feeling it themselves or they assume it from the other person, that the other person's feeling it, even if they're not. They lose all their impulse. And so that's another, they lose control because of that poor impulse control. And so it's doubly important if you understand that about yourself. Recognize it, number one, because that's brave. right? When I get into this kind of discussion, this kind of dynamic, I become X. And if you understand that about yourself and you know you're going to be in another conversation like that, then prepare for it. And that's part of what I've been. So one of the things we talked about before we started this was I've been working a little bit on performance because I did theater for 9 years, and I did the method form of acting, where literally when I would go on stage, I'd do my thing and I'd come off and somebody would say, "Oh, well, just can you recite one of the lines that you just," and I'm like, gone. To this day, I've got nothing, because I disassociated on stage, completely disassociated. When I have to do podcasts, right, or when I have to present my own stuff, I get nervous. I get nervous. And so I've been listening to Chris, I forget his last name, but he owns TED Talks now. He's owned it for a long time. And he wrote a fantastic book called TED Talks. In it, he, back to the impulse thing, if you understand something about yourself, then anticipate that by doing X or Y or whatever works. You keep testing it, right? So in the case of impulse control, I would say, if you understand that you, in that situation, you are prone to losing control and saying things that you don't want to say or don't mean to say and you can't take back, then script it. Or do what I did the other day. I told you I was working on this fake TED Talk, right? To understand kind of what is it that I'm doing with this, all of the articles I've published and the books, the book I've published, the books I'm writing, and all the stuff I've been teaching for all these years. And, what's the thread that runs through that? And so I actually recorded myself, which is really hard for me to do, telling a story two stories actually, that form the foundation of what my thread is through my entire life. And it was really important to do that because it actually made me cry. It made me cry. I'm like, me cry? I'm not a crier. Are you kidding me? It made me cry and then I knew I had something. I'd touched something. And so I can tell that story now, those stories, and not be scared, not fall apart. Why? Because I took Chris's advice in his book and I scripted it. But except in this case, I recorded it. And I'm a writer, not a talker in terms of like brainstorming and things like that. It's just over the years, the people I've worked with are oftentimes talkers. And so I've had to do that too, but I didn't realize that it would help. But I had to be me in this case. I couldn't escape, through a character, right? I had to be me.
Right.
So that's what I mean by impulse. If you know, it might not be impulse. It might be something else. It might be that you withdraw in those kinds of conversations. If somebody starts challenging you, you just pull back and you just stop talking, or, you shrink, you're a wallflower or something like that.
Is there a good resource that you know of for someone to discover what those tendencies are? Because I know that when I'm in those kinds of moments where, like, say the risk is high or tensions are high and emotions are high, like maybe this is one of my own personal ones, but my personal awareness of what I'm doing and saying goes way down. You blacked out when you gave acting performances, but sometimes I figuratively black out when I'm having difficult conversations. So how do you know what you're bad and good at when you're in those high intense moments?
Well, I think that this is a wonderful thing. You asked for resources, but hang on for just a second. And I do talk about this in the book in terms of moments when you're in the evaluation stage. We are also doing reflection and insight. So we reflect, we look back. So I just read an article today, actually, in the New York Times. They're talking about, well, you know what? We're not even very good at looking at ourselves. So what's better is you can do self-reflection, but it's better to just ask people.
Oh, yeah.
Just ask, what do I do? But the thing is, you can't have a generalized question. You have to be very specific. The other day, when we were having this discussion about M, and then I stopped talking, or I couldn't say anything, what happened after that? Because so whatever question it is, then ask it. But a generalized question will get you nowhere, and you might end up in another fight or, whatever. And as far as resources are concerned, there are self-assessments out there that can help you with your conflict style. What is my conflict style? Just Google it. I don't have anything. Maybe I need to write something about it. I was thinking about, I've written assessments before, so maybe I need to write a few assessments.
Maybe that's book number 6.
No, there's some really great resources out there just in terms of your own conflict style. There's a guy, actually, for those of you who are listening and you're thinking about the SAID method in the context of a relationship, like a romantic relationship. There's a guy out there called John Gottman, and he's right there in your hood. He's at UW, at University of Washington. And
I love him and his research.
He's amazing. And he can predict to something like 92 or 93% accuracy whether or not a couple's going to stay together, which is frightening, right? But he has this whole thing that he and his wife have been researching and evolving over decades around the 4 horsemen. I think it's even gone even farther than that. But I don't remember all of them. One's stonewalling, one is contempt, one is withdrawal. The other one is probably something I don't do, and that's why I never, ever, ever remember it. But there are behaviors that embody each one of these styles. One of those is going to resonate with you. So you can actually self-identify just by looking at some of the behaviors in relationships and conflict resolution. There are different styles that will give you some insight into probably what you do and what you are, and then will give you tips for how to manage that.
Yeah. Oh, you're just a wealth of information. Wonderful, wonderful things. I love it.
I don't know about that, but I'm sorry.
In fact, it gives me an idea. Would you be game to make up a list, like a top 5 or a top 10 list of your favorite book resources on all of this stuff?
Yeah, I actually already have some on the website, but
oh, awesome.
Well, but there are probably some. I have one on negotiation. I think I have one on body language.
Sure. Do you just send me the list and we'll make it up into like an awesome little PDF and like an interactive PDF for folks to like get all these books and all this information. So, because normally we always do show notes with every episode, but I think of reading lists and Alison Sigmon's communications reading list, must have reading list is important for this conversation, because there is, like you said, there's so much that you can learn about yourself through other people.
Well, yeah, because what we're doing is an opportunity to hold up a mirror, and you can see it probably in other people's behavior. Sometimes I think we even ask for a certain kind of response. I'll give you a quick example of that. When I was in Santa Fe in May, I took a painting class, and what I created was just, I thought, horrible. And so I told the instructor, I said, this is terrible. And she's like, oh, it's nice. Oh, it's not so bad. It's not that. And I'm like, no, it's terrible. And then, she started jumping on the bandwagon. Yeah. It is kind of bad, and then the other people were like, it's not great at all. No, it's not. So I asked for that feedback though. And then how did I feel afterwards? I felt like crap. I felt terrible, but I set myself up. I gave, I don't know that it was really actually that bad, but I was so committed to the idea. And I guess my personality is strong enough that they jumped on the bandwagon, and I'm not sure why I needed that. Why I insisted on it. So I think sometimes we create our own situation just by our own behavior and what we're asking for. Mm-hmm. If you want something different, then ask for something different.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah. Ugh. That's a great note to end on. And I would love to have you back, just because it's so funny. I want to have everyone back on the show. I just love all of you so much. So if you want to hear more about Alison and everything she's doing, then all of the stuff is going to be on show notes, and we will have an awesome little download goodie for you beyond the coloring book, which is also available and free for download. So Alison, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight as always, and anytime, just let me know.
I'll call you up.
Awesome.
As I mentioned earlier, Alison and I have worked up a must-read list of books for those of you looking to expand your communication skills. So beyond the Bare Naked Bravery adult coloring book, which is always available for you to download, you can also get a really rich list of resources to explore your own bad news delivery skills. All of that is available in the show notes for this episode, so you can just go ahead and visit barenakedbravery.com and you'll get directed to exactly where you need to be. Both Alison and I would love to hear all about your favorite parts of today's Bare Naked Bravery episode. You can find Alison and myself on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and more. Just go ahead and tag us so we can know what you're up to and jump in on the conversation. I'd like to do something new this week. Instead of just asking you for a review on iTunes, which you know it's coming, I'm not going to hide it, I would also actually like to read off a review left by Tom Morks. He says, really enjoyed listening to this show so far. Emily is a really engaging host and her interviews are insightful and inspiring. I always come away having learned something new. That is so great, Tom. Thank you for leaving that review. And if you'd like to leave a review, just go to the iTunes desktop app or your podcast app and search for the show in the store and then click review and rate. It's pretty easy and it really does help us out a whole lot. As always, you can download your Bare Naked Bravery coloring book, which has over 20 designs from international artists. All of them are so cool. You can download it at barenakedbravery.com/color. And if you're digging the music in today's episode, that is because it is brought to you by my friends at Music Box Licensing, a premier creative music agency dedicated to finding and crafting unique soundtracks. To find out more about all the artists, all the musicians, and all the other sponsors of the show, just visit barenakedbravery.com/sponsors. I am so looking forward to being with you next week. We have some great things in store for you, and until then, I have one message for you. It is this: be yourself, be vulnerable, be brave, because the world needs more of your bare naked bravery.